full of food now and you're just ready to listen and not sleep at all, right? The anytime right after lunch is so difficult because you're just, your bellies are full if you had lunch and you're like, oh, you're in soft chairs and not in comfortable chairs and stuff. Don't worry, if y'all fall asleep, I'm just going to take a picture of you and show you what you look like sleeping, so no problem. Actually, I used to teach a college class, and I always knew when papers were due, people had stayed up late at the other school I used to teach at, and so I used to bring water guns to class and just put them where they could see them. To say, I know y'all are working hard on your papers. Just know I'm going to give you the ministry of awakeness in case you need it. So, all right. Well, let me pray for us, and we will dive in for the rest of the session. Are y'all excited? Because I'm excited. I had a little Chick-fil-A, and it was delicious. Okay. Lord, thank you for my sisters here. I pray for all of us that we would be open-handed with what you want to teach us today. Lord, keep me from error. Help me present truth with grace and wisdom, Lord. I pray for the ladies that are listening that you would help them to examine their own lives, Lord, that you would help all of us reflect on what we're learning and see if there are things that need to change or things that we can say thank you for how you led us on the right path. And Lord, I pray that this would not just be a day full of making our brains fat and gaining more knowledge, but that it will impact how we live our lives. We love you. We pray this in your name. Amen. Okay. So, sorry. I know that's so horrible on the video. Y'all can start from right now after that, but we're a little bit too close right there. Okay. So we left on the break talking about second wave feminism, and we just got a little slice of what was going on in second wave feminism. But what happened, people were saying, this will fulfill you, this will liberate you. But lo and behold, women got what they asked for, and as I told you, they still felt like something was lacking. So this is where we left off. This Times article, it was a report on the state of women in America. And it says, you can't read it here, but a new poll shows why they are more powerful but less happy. And there was a real backlash against feminism. It got kind of a bad name within popular culture because they were saying, you sold us a false bill of goods, if you will. You said this was going to make us happy, and it didn't. And so that's where lunch was. But so Gloria Steinem and others were trying to fight against the backlash. So especially in the 90s, you saw women kind of saying, no, it's good for you, and others saying, no, it's bad for you. You can see a little Rosie the Riveter up there. It says, I blame the feminist movement for my unhappiness. And so that was kind of going on before we get the crest of third wave feminism. Let me just read a couple quotes. These people are not believers that are writing this, and so they're looking at the feminist movement and kind of at that stage saying, we're really struggling with what we deem the feminist movement was trying to teach us. Daniel Crittenden, this is a great book. It's called What Our Mothers Didn't Tell Us, Why Happiness Eludes the Modern Woman. And she says this, for all the ripping down of barriers that has taken place over a generation, we may have inadvertently also smashed the foundation necessary for our happiness. Pretending that we are the same as men with similar needs and desires has only led many of us to find out brutally how different we really are. And then the next one, this is a longer quote. It's from a journalist writing, Kay Edling in Newsweek. The article is called The Failure of Feminism. It was published in 1990. And she says this, to me, feminism is the great experiment. Feminism has backfired against women. I see feminism as the great experiment that failed. And women in my generation, these are second wave feminists, its perpetrators and the casualties. Many of us, myself included, are saddled with raising children alone. Remember, because they don't need a man. Feminism freed men, not women. Feminism made women disposable. What's worse, we asked for it. Many women decided you don't need a family structure to raise your children. We packed them off to daycare centers. where they could get their nurturing from professionals. Then we put on our suits and ties, we packed our briefcases and took off on that great experiment, convinced that there was no difference between ourselves and the guys in other offices. The reality of feminism, again, this is a woman who's not a believer, a journalist remarking on this. She says this: the reality of feminism is a lot of frenzied and overworked women dropping off kids at daycare centers. Now, I'm not commenting on whether women should be working or not, but this is a person not from a biblical worldview looking at this movement and saying, I don't know that this is really, really the way. So how do we now then, because of that backlash, I'm thinking of lunch still, how do we then discern with what's happening now in our present day, what we see as third wave feminism? I call this the gospel according to 50 Shades of Grey because third wave feminism, one of the key distinctions that we're going to see compared to earlier waves is how they deal with the idea of sexuality and how they treat sex. And I have not read 50 Shades of Grey. I'm not advocating for that. I know the storyline, this is the time, don't fess up if you've seen the movies or read the books, okay? But when 50 Shades of Grey as a book came out and the movies came out, I saw Christian women, people I went to church with, people writing blogs online, talking about what a positive movie this was. I saw friends that I knew on Facebook talking about they were going to go watch it, and I was shocked because my understanding of this movie is that it's a man who's pretty powerful and wealthy is into an approach to sex that's harmful to women, and so there's what is portrayed as a love story is actually a gross just twisting of God's approach to sexuality. In the same way, I'm picking on 50 Shades of Grey. One of my favorite movies growing up was Pretty Woman. But let's think about what Pretty Woman is really about, right? Richard Gere and Julia Roberts. She's a prostitute, right? And he hires her for a week, and it seems like it's a great love story because he pulls up in a limo, and there's flowers and doves and all that kind of stuff. But it's a story about lust, and it is also a gross twisting of God's ideal for love and relationships. So what we're seeing in our day and age is just a huge departure from the way God says, love and sex and all of that are good things, but within his boundaries. And we're seeing how far we have truly gotten from God's standards in relation to this. So when I Love Lucy was on television, they had separate beds because you could not show a married couple in the same bed. As a matter of fact, when Lucy actually got pregnant, they could not say the word pregnant on television because that was considered obscene. So just pause for just a moment and think about the shows that you watch on public television today, and what they show and what's considered okay at the 8 o'clock hour when kids may be watching that, or things that you can stream or get through YouTube. I'm just how far our culture has gotten within the last 50 or 60 years and changed about that. So when we think about third wave feminism, unlike the other waves where I could give you some key figures and some key things that they were fighting for or unifying causes around it, you really can't do that with third wave feminism. So the way I remember it is kind of by the tagline, embracing contradictions. Within this wave, they have gone farther than their foremothers, and what seems like a contradiction, they're just embracing that. We see a little Rosie the Riveter type on this poster here, and she says, "We can slay it. This is woman power. This way. This is what I have grown up as. This is really came in the 1990s. So we're going to look at some popular shows from around this time period. But I grew up in a day and age where women were taking control and you can do anything and go women. And there's a part of me that is, yeah, go women. But where they ended up in that is something that I think as believers we should have a caution to. So one other thing is, because since the advent of not only television, it's why I've used some TV shows and pop culture, but also I think in the last really 10 years through the influence of social media, we're seeing how media can reflect changes in the culture, as we've seen, but it also has a role in influencing those changes in the culture, and also kind of ripping down barriers to make things seem not quite so shocking. There's a book by a man named Maxwell McCombs. It's called Setting the Agenda, the Mass Media and Public Opinions. And in this, he has this idea that continued exposure to something takes away its shock value. And he says this: the mass media are teachers whose principal strategy of communication is redundancy. To see it over and over again. I think about it this way. I grew up going to a private Episcopalian school from kindergarten through 8th grade. My parents wanted us to go there because it had a very strong education. But when we moved to high school, I went to a public high school. So let me just give you, I liked St. John's, the school we went to growing up. It had very strict rules. I got in trouble one time for wearing clear nail polish. Girls were not allowed to wear makeup. We had uniforms. When an adult walked into the classroom, all of the students would stand up and say good morning and whatever the adult's name was. And so there was just something, after you're there for 10 years, you're just used to, this is how you act in this setting. When I moved to high school, I remember it was in my first week of high school. I went from an 8th grade class that had less than 40 to a freshman class that had over 600. There were students everywhere. I felt like it was craziness. And I remember going in between, switching from classes my freshman year, my first week, and you're like trying to dodge all these people, and you don't want to be late, and you're having to go all the way across the campus. But I remember being in that hallway with a crowd of people, and one student shouted a curse word at another student. And I was on a mission to get to my next class, and I just stopped because I was waiting to see like nuns and Father Burchell was our headmaster at the Episcopalian school. I was waiting for someone, a teacher, to like bring down the hammer, because this person said a curse word. And I remember standing in the hallway, people are bumping me, and I'm looking around, and there were adults in the hallway. There were teachers in the hallway, and nobody said anything. And I just thought, whoa, this is a different world. I also remember that first week, an adult came into the classroom, and I stood up and I looked around and nobody's standing up. It was just different. But by the time I got to my senior year, I heard people cursing, and I wasn't joining in. I was a believer by the time, and the Lord had worked on me about cursing. But I remember thinking that was not shocking anymore, because it was just something that happened. But that first time, it almost took my breath away. Well, the media in the same way, it's shocking when we first see it. Something on TV, during the break. You reminded me of a show called Maude, a character called Maude, who was the first person who had an abortion on television, and how that was so shocking at that time. They didn't show it, but discussed it. But now it wouldn't be as shocking today. And I don't say that out of judgment to someone who's done that. God loves us very much. But that was a shocking moment in pop culture. In the same way, I'm watching what's happening with cartoons today. And Arthur is a show that had it's a cartoon for kids, had the first homosexual kiss. And now I think the Disney Channel is featuring a cartoon that involves a transgender individual. And I don't say that out of a unloving, because God loves all of us. He loves us enough to want us to live according to his guidelines. But the media has influenced young children and trying to make it less shocking, less common, that these types of ideas should be commonplace. And so I say that we should be not passive consumers of media. Those that are working with kids, that have kids, I work with high school students at my church, the girls, that we want to be discerning as we're listening to things, not just vibing on it and not realizing, okay, how is this impacting thinking? Because the media does have a role to play in what we think is, this is in bounds or this is not in bounds. Think about it this way. Look at some of the television shows over the last couple of decades. Excuse me. So you may not be able to see it from where you are, but on the top left of the screen is a television show called Modern Family. I think it's now celebrating its 10th year, or it's been on the television for quite some time. So Modern Family, it's a reimagining of what family looks like, and in the show it focuses on an entire family that one is what you would think of as a normal family, and they're super dysfunctional. In the middle is a man who's an older man married to a younger woman, and on the right side is a homosexual couple that has adopted a child. In the middle, you see what's called the new normal. It's no longer on television, but it premiered in probably about 2008, and it was called it's called the new normal, and it's centered around a single mom who was raising her child, and she was going to have a baby for a homosexual couple that couldn't. And they're telling you their message by calling this the new normal. The man who's behind that show is a man who is homosexual himself. He was behind Glee, and he's American Horror Story, and some other shows that are on television today. In articles, when he was talking about this, he wants this type of situation not to be shocking. He said, I'm writing a story, so hopefully a decade from now, this will not be anything that, makes people raise their eyebrows. But Friends, I think it's celebrating its 25th anniversary right this year. Friends in the 90s, when it premiered, people were saying, this is what a family looks like. Instead of our friend groups compose our family, and looking at what it was like for single and the newly married people to navigate relationships in the city. ABC Family, that was the worst name ever for a television network, okay? Because their tagline was a new kind of family, but even that was too restricting for them. About 4 years ago, they changed their name from ABC Family to Freeform. And you can read articles about why they made that decision, but they said, we want to reflect the day and age in which we live, where structures are not so rigid any longer. So a television network that is aimed towards teenagers has an approach that boundaries are bad, definitions are bad, we want to be free form. Or, now this is my childhood right here, this is me growing up. Okay, Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle, these are empowered, take charge kind of women up here. Okay, this is Katniss Everdeen in the middle. If you watch Hunger Games, Kelly Clarkson, I could totally sing this right now, but this is being taped. Miss Independent, I could hear it in my mind right now, or Destiny's Child, Independent Women. I mean, this is like, we are strong women. This message that you're coming across, even in the last few years, we've reimagined fairy tales where they don't need a man to save them any longer. So if you saw the new Snow White who is in battle gear here, she didn't need the huntsman. She fought her demons on her own. Or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We're definitely seeing a kind of kick tail type of woman in the 1990s, celebrating that. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, think about the shows on TV today. Oftentimes, you'll see a strong, empowered female character, but the male characters are portrayed as idiotic or kind of buffoonish. One of my favorite shows that's on right now is called Blue Bloods. If you don't like it, don't be offended. I love you, Jesus loves you. But it's such a rare show in this day and age to see some male characters that are ridiculed or mocked that actually have a little backbone to them. I think about like Everybody Loves Raymond. Everybody Loves Raymond. He's kind of a buffoonish character, Or if you see shows that are aimed at kids or teenagers, oftentimes the parents are portrayed as clueless or idiotic. There's a message behind that. Whether we realize it or not, you can't trust your parents, or guys are hopeless, you're going to have to take charge. I mean, the message, it's on your clothing, whether you realize it or not, like the pot roast, okay? And so this may be a message that you're like, I like that one. Okay, that's good. I kind of like this one too. Does anyone know what this show is? It's the Powerpuff Girls. It's a cartoon. It's that came out in the 2000s, and since I know you just love it, you're like, I could tell you all the stories here. I see a couple of you in your eyes that you may recognize it. But for those of you that don't, the character on the left is kind of the villain of this cartoon, and he's known as him. And he's dressed in, you can't see, kind of super unique, let's say, clothing, kind of maybe high heelish, a little skirt, makeup, but he's named him. So the villain is him. The Powerpuff Girls are made of sugar and spice and everything nice. There was some kind of chemical accident, and so they each have more of sugar or spice of something. That they have a little bit more of that. And the guys over to the right are called the Rowdy Rough Boys. And the Rowdy Rough Boys are not exactly as bad villains as him, but the way that the Powerpuff Girls subdued the Rowdy Rough Boys is very interesting. You know, like if it was the Wicked Witch and the water was not good for the Wicked Witch or something. But the way that these girls, a cartoon aimed at elementary school girls, the way they subdued them is with a kiss. Now, what message is that? Think about it for just a second. What message is that teaching a young girl that the enemy, the villain, is a him, and the way to control or subdue a guy is through a kiss, physical affection? Whether, I don't want to make it bigger than it needs to be, but think about what that's planting in the mind of young girls or young boys that may be watching that. You see in the 1990s, we get Sex in the City. These are modern girls. This is very different than what we're seeing in second wave feminism. The 4 friends that are a part of Sex in the City, one character, her name's Samantha, and her approach to sexuality was such that she had sex like a guy. No emotional attachments. She could have sex with whoever, whenever she wanted. And the idea was that we're just like the guys. I did not watch that show, but a student at the school that I used to teach at wrote a book called Sex and the City Uncovered. And she said the ending arc of that is Samantha realizes, well, I can't do that because I'm forming emotional attachments, and this is having a huge impact on the way I think about myself and the way that I think about guys. So what she thought, what meant her carefree and cool, is actually having a really harmful effect on her. This was years and years ago, not at the church that I'm at right now, but I was discipling some young high school girls, and one girl was going to a private Christian school, and she was telling me that in order to date at her school, it was expected that she would sext with the guy first. If you don't know what that means, it's sending pictures or graphic words of a sexual nature. And so she said, I just, like, that was accepted at her Christian school, not my teachers, but that was kind of the culture there, that it was expected that that's how you did relationships. The idea of friends with benefits, or now if this is your favorite show, just keep quiet just for a second, okay? If you love The Bachelor, okay, if you followed Hannah Brown and The Bachelorette this summer and whatever you think about her, think about what The Bachelor is teaching, okay? Whether it's one guy with 25 girls or vice versa, from what I understand, that they'll go on group dates where a guy, if he's the bachelor, or a girl, if she's the bachelorette, will kiss several guys on a date. It's expected even towards the end of the season that they may be sleeping with several guys, and that in this, truncated, very, shortened time that you can date and treat a relationship like this, and then it will be a happily ever after And after it's been on for like 25 seasons, only a few of those relationships have worked out. Whatever you think about the show, if you love a good, what you think of as a love story, it's teaching you that sexuality is no big deal, that a kiss means nothing. There was a book written by a woman named Charlize Azam, who is not a believer, and because it's just us girls in here, the title of the book is called Oral Sex is the New Goodnight Kiss. And she was doing a study of middle school girls, teach a class in girls ministry. She was looking at middle school girls and the impact these ideas of sexuality had, and that a kiss means nothing any longer. Like it's nothing. It's not special. And so that there's this group that she was following around that they were being taught that in order to be in a relationship as a middle school girl, that oral sex was the expectation instead of a good night kiss. Just our culture has lost its mind. It has lost its mind. It's lost its rudder. This is what happened. I think this verse is on another slide, but the way of man, what seems right in our own mind leads to death. This attitudes towards sexuality that we see in our culture is having such a profound and horrible impact on girls and guys today. The third wave feminism was saying this is a way that you show you're empowered. You have sex just like the guys. That you take control of your sexuality. Again, remember, right observation does not always lead to right interpretation. Where second wave feminists were protesting pornography, third wave feminists are embracing pornography, saying as long as a woman gives consent, it cannot harm her. Think about that. Just think about that for a second. As long as a woman says it's okay, it cannot harm her. You and I say okay to things all the time that are not good for us. But the bill of goods that is being sold is that you're taking that people can't have power over you. As a matter of fact, there's a branch within third wave feminism that started towards the end of second wave called power feminism. It's kind of gone out of vogue because people realize what a horrible and damaging idea it was. But power feminists believe that if you just say there's no such thing as rape, that a man can rape you. Because if you say there's such a thing as rape, you're giving power to somebody else. And so they were trying to tell people, just know, you didn't get raped. No man can do that to you, or if it happens to a man. And what a horrible idea to put out there. Getting ahead of myself, but the UN, which is, I'm going to edit my idea on this, but the UN, the United Nations, has a commission for the status of women around the world. One of the things that have come out of that is they are advocating for the legalization of prostitution in certain areas around the world, saying that will give the power back to women. And I just think it's so wrong-headed. And that's what happens when we try to do what seems right in our own mind instead of going according to biblical principles. If you saw this movie by Sarah Jessica Parker was in it, it's kind of reflecting a little bit of the tension that second wave feminists were feeling. It says, I don't know how she does it. If it were easy, men would do it too. And the idea in that movie is that a woman who has a high-powered job, has a marriage, has kids, like, can she do it all without going crazy? Because the idea is, being a housewife is kind of gotten a bad name in our day and age. Any show that has housewives today, you get the Real Housewives. Those are people that are probably not. If you have close to you a Real Housewives of Atlanta that takes place around here, but they're kind of ridiculed and mocked on TV. These women that are willing to participate in this, but it's these are women that are not just staying at home. They're working and that kind of stuff, but the shows are actually mocking them, whether they realize it or not, their lifestyles and their choices. Desperate Housewives is not on the air any longer, but it was looking at this women on a certain in suburbia, and they were women that were not satisfied with their lives, and you would never want to live on that street because every kind of crime known to man happened on that street. But housewives are looked down upon, but at the same time, we're seeing in our culture the tension people feel. If if they're working and wanting to have a family, the culture is even realizing that almost seems impossible. They're saying that to do both, that our ideas towards having kids, Baby Mama was a show that it's not a show, it's a movie that came out with Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, or The Switch, Jennifer Aniston is having a baby by artificial insemination, or the pregnancy pack was actually on Lifeway, good old Lifeway. It's looking at a group of high school students that all made a pact to get pregnant, but then raise their babies together without the guy as 16, 15, 17-year-olds. And so what makes a family today? What they're saying, well, we made this decision to all have kids together, so this is empowering for us. So as we think about how the culture has changed, before we make some takeaways, let me give you some, I think I've got 6 up here, some key distinctions of third wave feminism. Because we don't have a figure that I can point to. The person who popularized third wave feminism, the term, saying what I believe is different of what they believed, is a woman who, Rebecca Walker, her mom is Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple. Rebecca Walker's godmother was Gloria Steinem, and so, but Rebecca Walker is a woman of color who is also a lesbian, and she said what second wave feminism is arguing for and what it's preaching is not my life, it's not my experience. And so she said we needed a third wave, and what happened in the 1990s, we're seeing kind of the impact of that today. So the key distinction is that it's ubiquitous, and I know that you use that word all the time, but for those of us that have to look it up, it just means it's everywhere. It's in the water. It's the fluoride in the water. This is the quote I showed you earlier by Jennifer Baumgartner and Amy Richards. When it's talking about their generation, the presence of feminism in our lives is taken for granted. It's everywhere. When it's saying we watch it, we read it, we think about it, Carolyn McCulley said that, it's because it's in our pop culture, it's in our media, it's in advertising, it's just all around us. We scarcely notice that it's there. The second kind of key distinction of this wave is that you're seeing this break with earlier generations, that they are dissatisfied with the second wave particularly, not first wave so much, but this is from a website that is dedicated to the third wave of feminism, and it says this: we are women coming of age now. We are putting a new face on feminism. We are taking it beyond the women's movement that our mothers participated in, bringing it back to the lives of real women who juggle jobs, kids, money, and personal freedom in a frenzied world. So these are the women that are saying, we tried it, what our moms, were advocating for, and we are not happy, okay? We're the Kay Ebling, where the reality is a bunch of women dropping their kids off at daycare, frenzied. And so they're saying, how do we still advocate for women with the reality of that we just can't do it all? Again, what they end up telling us to do, I think, is lacking. But they're saying, okay, we're definitely breaking with some of the things that our mothers were advocating for. The third one, and this, because I get to work with college students, this is kind of appealing. For those of you that are in the room, that you think, well, I kind of like this too. They say they want more action over theory. To be fair, third wave feminists that are saying that, there was a lot of action happening within first and second wave. But their perspective on the second wave of feminism is that you talked a lot about helping women, but you really didn't help all women around the world. And so they want to put into practice things that will help women, not just here in America, but around the world. We have seen a lot of emphasis on social justice in our day and age, especially within the last couple of years. But there was a movement probably about 15 years ago where a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, were established to address the needs of women around the world. And so you'd see an organization like End It, if you know what that is, where people will put the cross on their, the X on their hands, and it's talking about human trafficking, to stop human trafficking. you'll see women want to and men get involved in that, or even things like Tom's shoes, if you have that. They're wanting to address the physical needs of people today, not from necessarily a Christian perspective at all, but they're saying, okay, people are hungry and not having, and they're malnourished. And so you're seeing a lot of people, I think this is a good thing of this generation and the generation before, wanting to advocate, let's do something about it. But I'll always say, in our desire to advocate and help someone's physical needs, which are so important from a Christian perspective, if you don't address their spiritual needs, I can't remember off the top of my mind who said it, but they said, all you've done is enabled someone to be better dressed and well fed and sent them on their way to hell. And so I'm grateful for any organization that is addressing the physical and health needs of people around the world. I'm grateful for that. I wish more believers would be involved in that, because we know what the true needs that people have. Now, if you're homeless, to have a hot meal, that is a physical need. But we have greater needs that are spiritual that I wish, and I'm excited to see more Christians involved in living out James 1:27. If you haven't read that lately, it says, pure and undefiled religion is this, to care for orphans and widows in their distress and keep oneself unstained from the world. What James is saying in the first century, he's saying real religion, like people that have been really changed by having a relationship with Christ, that first changes you. That's the thing about being unstained by the world. We're not conformed to the world. We're having an impact on the world. But he says to care for orphans and widows in their distress. In the first century, the most vulnerable people in society would have been orphans and widows. And so James is saying, look, if Christ has really changed you, it impacts you, but it should impact others. And a way that was displayed by caring for the vulnerable. And so we have a mandate today to address spiritual but also physical needs. As believers, we should do that. So I want to say I'm grateful for feminist organizations that may not know the gospel, that are still trying to do that, but I know ultimately it will be lacking, because apart from the gospel, the truth is that people will die and go to hell. And so, that being said, one of the greatest things that we've seen feminists do is advocate for, third wave feminists in America, is really advocate for the plight of women around the world today. So if you have never seen this, I think it's fully available on YouTube. It's a movie called It's a Girl. I'll show a clip of it in my class this week, but the tagline of it is the 3 deadliest words in the world. It's a girl. And it's a little ironic to me that feminists are seeing this, because they're at the same time that they're championing a movie like this, they're also championing abortion rights, which largely target girls around the world. In this particular documentary, it's looking at girls in India and in China, and the impact about what it means to be born a girl in those societies, and how many girls are aborted because, in some places in India, you cannot identify the gender of a baby. It's illegal to have a sonogram, and for the nurse to tell you the gender of the baby, because the fear is that then the parents will then go and kill the child or abort the child. From this documentary, one of the most chilling testimonies is a woman, she's an older woman in India, who is talking about a camera crew has come to talk to her about her experience with her children, and she talks about where she has buried 7 of her babies that were girls, that she gave birth to, and then she strangled because they were girls. And at one point she giggles, and I weep for that woman, because I know she cannot know the Lord, and just is, she believes something about the worth and value of a little girl that we don't see in Scripture. She thinks they're disposable. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in India today, and she said part of the reason is that in that society, something that's in the air, a belief, is that it's just more valuable to have a boy child, because when you get older, when a son gets married, he lives with you and his wife comes to live with them. But if a girl gets married, she goes and lives with her husband's family. And so if you only have girls, the thought is that there will be nobody to care for you when you get older. And so that just in subtle ways like that, girls are devalued. Girls are devalued here in America too, but in different ways, and men in other ways. But so this documentary is showing just how deadly still today it is for some women around the world, some little girls. And so it's hard to watch. It's not going to be something that you would say I enjoyed watching it, but it would be something that would be eye-opening for you to have an understanding of what women around the world are facing today. And so we're seeing third wave feminism want to get more involved in these types of things. Activism, human trafficking. Again, they're championing something like that, but then at the same time you see the, not hypocrisy, but the dichotomy of advocating for not killing little babies that have been born that are girls at the same time, but advocating that a woman is truly free, empowered if she gets to control her own body. Okay. The fourth one is that men are no longer the enemy. This is the area where I would say, I'm watching to make sure when we're supposed to stop for a break. Okay. This is the one area that I would say where I think we are definitely seeing a shift, and maybe it's possible that there is a fourth wave of feminism. Third wave feminists, when they started, people like Rebecca Walker and others were saying, we don't think men are inherently evil, okay, and that men are the problem. We want to learn what it's like to work alongside a man. As a matter of fact, if you ever saw the TV show Ally McBeal, second wave feminists really reacted to Ally McBeal. I think she was a lawyer, and but she was also very interested in having a relationship and getting married. So second wave feminists were saying, whoa, you don't need a man to fulfill you. But third wave feminists were like, well, some of us want a man and think that being in a relationship would be great. So they felt this tension. So they're trying to say, we're not trying to compete against men. However, I have seen a shift probably in the last 5 years about that really distinguishes something that's happening now versus those early third wave feminists. And it has to do with not only the Me Too movement and the Women's March, which I hate to talk about politics without y'all knowing me very well, but just trust my heart, sisters. There are some wrongs that need to be addressed. Violence against women or men should be addressed. But in doing that, I've seen we kind of live in this outraged culture today where we're seeing what happened in the Women's March. There were women that were not allowed to participate because they did not believe in abortion. That there were men that were run off from those marches because there's no way they could understand what women went through. And so I don't think if there is a fourth wave, that men are the enemy, but I think because of the idea of intersectionality, if you've heard about that term, it's more like anybody in any kind of position of power is seen as the enemy, that they can't have any kind of goodwill towards the other. In that, because by way of your socioeconomic status, by your gender, by your race, for whatever reason, if you hold what will be looked at as some level of power, there is in our culture today kind of the idea of you can't understand what I'm going through. You are just part of the problem. And so that's why people today, when they're writing on feminism, are still trying to decide, what do we do about this? Because there seems to be kind of the boogeyman, and in some cases there should be. There are some wrongs that are being perpetrated. But again, I would always take us back to the scripture. That's where our foundation should be. It's not human beings that are our enemies. It's sin and our own sin. But we're seeing, at least within third wave feminism, they were trying to say men are not the enemy. We want to learn to cooperate with them. But something's happened in the last 5 years as I'm sitting back and watching. Do y'all, not in a stalker weird kind of way, but when you travel or you go to eat, do you like to people watch? You know what I'm talking about? Like, I love it. I get to travel quite a bit, and so especially when I'm overseas, one of my favorite things to do if it's like in Europe or somewhere, to sit at a little sidewalk cafe and just watch people. Not like weird, okay, not like I'm stalking people, but I love to observe people, see what influences them and what kind of things they like to talk about. I hate them all. I mean, it's if you ever read Dante's Inferno, I'm sure like the mall is in one of those circles of hell if he knew about it. I mean, I do not like shopping, but I do enjoy watching people around Christmas time, and I grieve a little bit because it's supposed to be the happiest time of year, and if you ever go to a mall, it will convince you of the depravity of human beings, okay? Because they're like dragging kids around, they're going shopping, and everyone looks so unhappy at that time of year, unless they're at a Starbucks and they have a really big drink of, like hot chocolate, or for you that like pumpkin spice latte or something like that. But I love to observe people. And as I'm sitting back and observing the culture, because again, I want to be like a daughter of Issachar, so I understand our times, I'm sitting back and watching a new dynamic when it comes to who they're saying the enemy is today. And it looks like anyone that may have power different from yours, or it is what it seems like. But just file that away, because I'm still mulling that over and thinking about it. The fifth one is that this wave wants to be way more inclusive, purposefully, in that third wave feminists will say that first and second wave feminism was primarily addressing the concerns of white women. And again, as I said, mostly middle-class white women. Within second wave, we just don't have time to look at it today. But there were women of color and women of different socioeconomic backgrounds advocating within the second wave of feminism. But third wave feminism say, we want to bring to the forefront, what are the things that would impact their life today? And so you get this, we can all do it, that we want to be inclusive of people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, sexualities, and this is kind of interesting to watch, sexual orientations, what they're doing with that. There's a little tension within the movement today. This idea is that you do you. Like whatever you want to do, you be you, and we're just gonna, or you come be a part of us. Like they want to be very inclusive, except for anyone that will stand that there is an absolute truth. Christianity is becoming more and more the boogeyman in our culture today, within American culture. But they say, be you, like celebrate your, I hate the phrase your truth. There's the truth, okay? It's not your truth. But the natural outworking of what happened in second wave about personal experience being a way that you can find truth. Third wave feminists are saying, let's include everyone. If this is what you feel is empowering to you, that we want to embrace that and celebrate that. And so you'll see kind of a tension they're feeling is what to do with people of the LGBTQ and then the other letters community. So you get a person like Bruce Jenner, who was an Olympian. He's an athlete who competed in the decathlon, so one of the hardest events in the Olympics, who came out within the last decade as transgender. And so this is the cover of Family of Vanity Fair, and he says, "Call me Caitlin." So he wants to be referred to as a woman. When he dies, I don't mean this in a demeaning way. No matter what our culture teaches about gender today, when we are reduced to bones, people will be able to look at our bones and say whether we were male or female. In my class this week, we'll have a whole half a day talking about gender and how it's being redefined on Facebook. When they were wrestling with what to do about gender, when you sign up to Facebook about 8 years ago, they added a different button. When you sign in, if you do Facebook, you get to select whether you're male or female, but then they added an option of other. And if you clicked other, it gave you, at the first time, 58 different gender options of what you get to define yourself as. And the truth is that God designed us, and He names us, and He defines what we are. But in a culture that's saying, you do you follow your own truth, we've lost our moorings. And so, but when Caitlyn Jenner was called the Woman of the Year, was voted Woman of the Year, feminists had a little moment of, wait a minute, Caitlyn Jenner doesn't know what it's like to be a woman and face the, what it's, the kind of what we felt, where people not persecuted but held women back. He was an Olympian, an athlete, a white man and he still is. He can't understand the reality of what it means to live like as a woman in this culture today. And so you saw kind of what do we do with this? Because we're saying, you do you follow your truth. But then feminism, which is embracing of women, now that they're saying, well, I guess we can't say that is wrong. We've lost our moorings. The natural outworking of what's happening with this inclusivity of third wave feminism is they don't have a leg to stand on when they want to critique Caitlyn Jenner being Woman of the Year. So LGBTQ issues are ways within third wave feminism you see a big break between second wave feminists. Second wave feminists are rejecting this, that are rejecting any type of saying that if a person is not biologically a female, then they will never understand the reality of living life in our shoes. And so this is Laverne Cox. She was on the show. He was on the show Orange is the New Black. This individual is transgender and has been considered groundbreaking. Entertainment Weekly, which is now it's monthly, they each year have an LGBTQ issue where they're looking at how the perspectives of lesbian and gay, bisexual, transgender people are being advocated for through media. And she was considered a heroine for her advocacy on the show as a transgender person on a show in a woman's prison, but also how she's choosing to speak up for people that are living the type of life that she's living. And so we're seeing that this is definitely how third wave feminism is wanting to be more inclusive of people. And then the sixth one, and we will take our break after this one before we pivot, is the different ideas towards sexuality. This would be the sixth distinction. And if you can see on this cartoon, this girl in a bikini says, everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel, male-dominated culture. She's looking at the woman on the right, and the woman on the right is looking at the girl in the bikini and says, nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel, male-dominated culture. You see the different perspectives in there? So this girl thinks because she's in a full covering that she's in a male-dominated culture. The woman who's in a full covering is looking at her and saying she can't help but be objectified in her culture. Third wave feminists want to take back their sexuality. They don't want to give power to somebody else. And so instead of Ariel Levy, who is not a believer, wrote a book called Chauvinist Female Pigs, or Female Chauvinist Pigs, and was commenting on the shift that happened in third wave feminism. And she was saying where people were protesting Playboy as objectifying women in second wave. They were burning Playboys in that freedom trash can, throwing it off and saying this is objectifying for women. In third wave feminists, you'll wear Playboy bunny, probably not any longer, but in the early 1990s, you could buy a t-shirt with a Playboy bunny, that emblem on it, and this was showing you were empowered. You could wear a little chain with a Playboy bunny, that this is a modern woman. There's a show, if you're ever up late, and I know you're not watching it, but if you've ever been up late, there will be commercials for a show called Girls Gone Wild. When Girls Gone Wild premiered, the whole idea of this show is where the man who was in charge of it, who's made millions of dollars off it, he meets Jesus. He would go to where college girls were having spring break, and he would video them lifting their shirts up and showing their chests. And he talks about the change in just a decade of when he started doing that. when he'd go on college campuses. When he first started doing this, now listen, he had to get girls drunk enough that they lowered their inhibitions to lift their shirts up. But he said as his popularity grew and his culture started changing, the bus would pull up with Girls Gone Wild on the placard on the side, and girls would be running up to the bus, lifting their shirts up just to get on a video and to get that cheap trucker hat. There was a television show that premiered on Lifetime probably about 8 years ago, and it's called Preacher's Daughters. And on iTunes, you can get usually the first episode of a lot of television shows for free. And so I downloaded the first episode of it. And on this show, and of course, they pick they do. And Jesus loves them. And so, but these young girls had believed a lie about what it meant to be a woman in our day and age. And so I remember vividly one young girl, one preacher's daughter, who was, I think, in high school, but she could have been like middle school. When she was asked what she wanted to grow up and be, she said a porn star. Like, that was her aspiration. And of course, they picked her because her parents are wringing their hand what to do about this girl. But that in our day and age that we have young girls aspiring to be porn stars. There is a new movie that released in the last couple of weeks where Jennifer Lopez is in it, talking about female porn stars. And of course, they're lauded as empowered, but they're ripping guys off. It's based on a true story. Our culture says that is empowering to women, that you take back your sexuality. You have sex like a man. I'll show you a book here after the break that's talking about just how deeply that is harming our young women today. And so these new attitudes towards sexuality of what means that you are empowered, what means you are a modern woman, I think are just honestly lies from the pit of hell. And that's why I say our culture has lost its mind. And so I whatever you think about third wave feminism, I want to be fair. I'm thankful for anyone that is going to advocate for the needs of men and women around the world and try to adjust that. It's what Margaret Sanger was doing, but she was so wrong-headed in how to solve that problem. And so we want to champion what we can from a biblical perspective, but we also want to be honest about the road where this is leading is a road that leads to death. So that's kind of a hard note to end on. So let me recommend the book for y'all, and it will be our first door prize here for this at the end of this session. It's a book by Mary Cassian. She's written a lot on the subject of feminism. A book called The Feminist Mistake. It was originally called The Feminist Gospel. Is a deeper book. The class is having to read it. It has a lot to do with talking about feminist theology. It's a great book that I would recommend. However, if you're wanting to think about how this movement is impacting girls today, this is a great, it's not really a Bible study, but it sort of is. It's called Girls Gone Wise in a World Gone Wild. So you can kind of see what she's playing off of there. And she's looking in this book at the wise woman of Proverbs versus the wild woman of Proverbs. And the book looks at 20 points of contrast between those two women. Let me just read a couple of them for you. Heart, counsel, appearance, body language, sexual conduct, boundaries. So each chapter is a different point of contrast, looking at the biblical foundation and then talking about what our culture is saying to women today. It's a great book that to go through. I think any woman could benefit from it. If you're leading a Bible study or if you're in college, I think this would be fantastic for college-age women, maybe high school women, probably a little bit too mature for middle school women. So, okay, let's see. Sarah.